Far up north, deep between the mountains, there was a forest so remote it barely appeared on any map. After 2 hours of driving north from the nearest small town, the asphalt ended, and the road turned into a rough, narrow trail scattered with stones. I stopped the car there. The rest I'd have to walk. The sky was gray. The clouds hung low enough to brush the tops of the trees. The cold was damp, and every breath felt like it filled my chest with glass dust. I'd come this far for one reason only: to be alone for a few days. My phone was on airplane mode. I didn't want to hear from anyone. I slung my backpack over my shoulder and stepped onto the path. The moment I entered the tree line, the forest seemed to close behind me. The car, the road, the world outside, it all vanished into the silence. The only sound left was the crunch of leaves under my boots. I wanted to reach the lake before dark. I'd read about it on an old camping blog. The water is clear as glass, untouched by wind. Now that I was here, that glass-like calm felt less peaceful and more watchful. After about half an hour, the path split in two. There was a wooden signpost, its surface eaten by moss, the letters long since erased. I checked my map. No signal. The sun was sinking fast, the light turning from gold to dull gray. I chose a direction at random. As soon as I stepped deeper into the forest, the world went completely silent, like I had crossed into somewhere sound wasn't meant to exist. The trail narrowed, the ground damp and uneven. Branches brushed against my face. Every now and then, a bird cried out, but the sound never lingered. It was swallowed by the woods. The deeper I went, the darker it became. Even though the sky was still visible above, the trees devoured the light. Then ahead I saw a faint clearing. A thin layer of mist hung over it. When I got closer, I finally saw the lake. Just as the blog had promised, the surface was still, so still it looked solid. I picked a spot near the edge between two large pines and set up camp. The ground was soft with moss, damp but manageable. When I finally got the fire going, the smoke filled the air with a smell that felt like safety. I boiled water, heated a meal, and opened my notebook to jot down a few thoughts. The forest is quieter than I expected. The water doesn't move. It feels alive in its own silence. Reading the line back to myself made me uncomfortable. Even my voice didn't echo here. It was as if the trees were listening. The fire crackled softly, the only sound that felt normal. Then, somewhere in the distance, I heard something else, a faint, metallic scraping sound. It came in short bursts, dragging across what I guessed was rock. I froze. No wind, no movement, just that sound. Then it stopped. I waited. Nothing. Probably just an animal, I told myself, though I'd never heard one that made a sound like metal on stone. I added another log to the fire and crawled into my tent. The fabric still smelled new. I zipped it up, turned off my flashlight, and lay there in the dark. Sleep didn't come easily. The ground was cold, and the air smelled of wet soil. I could hear my own heartbeat more clearly than I could hear the world outside. Then came a sound, soft, steady, close. Breathing, not mine. Someone or something was breathing just outside the tent. Slow, heavy breaths, ragged at the edges. My entire body went rigid. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. The sound lasted maybe 5 seconds, then faded. I waited longer. Nothing. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight but didn't turn it on. The silence stretched out like a living thing. Finally, I heard it again, a faint brushing against the fabric of the tent, like a hand dragging along the side. I flicked the flashlight on. Yellow light flooded the tent. The sound stopped instantly. I held my breath, nothing but my pulse pounding in my ears. After several minutes, I switched it off again, lay back down, and waited for dawn. When I finally unzipped the tent in the morning, the world outside was gray and drowned in fog. The lake looked like a mirror made of smoke. That's when I noticed the ground. There were marks in the dirt, drag marks, deep and uneven, as if something heavy had been pulled toward the lake. No clear footprints, no tire tracks, just grooves. I followed them to the edge. They disappeared into the water. The surface was perfectly still but dark, almost black now. I crouched down and stared. There was no reflection. The water was too opaque. Then something moved beneath it, a slow, dark shape gliding just under the surface. I blinked, and it was gone. The water didn't ripple. That was enough. I started packing up. Every few seconds I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. The forest was silent, patient. When I was nearly done, a dull thud echoed through the trees. Heavy, wet, like something falling or being dragged. I grabbed my bag and took the trail back. At least I thought it was the trail. The forest looked different now. None of the turns felt familiar. Every tree looked identical. I picked a direction and kept walking. After a while, my breathing turned to mist. Then, from behind me, the metallic scraping returned. Closer this time, steady and deliberate. I didn't turn around. I just walked faster. Light began to filter through the trees ahead. I ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots caught at my boots. When I finally broke through the tree line, I saw my car waiting on the side of the road. Relief hit me like air after drowning. I climbed in, slammed the door, and started the engine. As the wheels spun against the dirt, I glanced into the rearview mirror. The forest stood silent behind me. But between the trees, just a few meters back, something dark was there. A shape. Not moving, just watching. I didn't look again. I drove. By the time I reached the town, night had fallen. I checked into a roadside motel, dropped my backpack on the bed, and went straight to the shower. Hot water washed away the dirt, but not the feeling that I hadn't really left the forest behind. I caught my reflection in the mirror. Red eyes, pale skin, the kind of exhaustion that feels older than sleep. When I came out, the backpack was still on the bed. I bent to open it. As I unzipped the main pocket, something small and heavy fell out and hit the floor with a dull thud. I froze. A stone, covered in wet moss, streaked with mud. I recognized it instantly. It looked exactly like the ones from the edge of the lake. I never packed it. I never touched it. I picked it up. It was cold, slick with moisture. Beneath the dirt, I could see something metallic, like a small rusted ring embedded in the rock. I brushed at it with my thumb, and the edge sliced my skin. Blood welled up. I dropped the stone, turned to wash my hand. When I looked back at the bed, the stone was gone. Outside the window, the night was still. Then, faintly, from somewhere beyond the parking lot, I heard that sound again. Metal dragging over stone. Only this time, it was closer. It was supposed to be an easy day. A simple inspection, a quick report, and I'd be back before nightfall. That was the plan. I'd done this sort of job dozens of times before, hiking into old communication sites, checking signals, logging readings, replacing cables. Nothing about it ever felt dramatic, just routine. But that morning, when the call came about the abandoned fire tower, something in the man's voice on the radio unsettled me. He said the tower hadn't been used in 15 years. Nobody had clearance to go there anymore. Yet over the past week, the automatic transmitter tied to that location had started broadcasting faint static again, on a frequency that was supposed to be dead. I loaded my gear into the truck and left before sunrise. The road wound through pine forests and rolling fog, the air sharp with the smell of wet earth. The further I drove, the narrower the path became, until the trees leaned so close that their branches scraped along the windows. My GPS stopped working an hour in. By the time I reached the old service gate, I hadn't seen another car or even a sign of human life since morning. I parked the truck, stepped out, and the silence hit me. A silence so heavy it seemed to press against my ears. Even the birds were quiet. I slung my backpack over one shoulder and started walking toward the tower. The trail was half swallowed by moss and roots, the boards of the old walkway slick with rain. Each step echoed faintly, lost in the fog. It took me nearly an hour to reach the clearing. When I finally saw the tower, my stomach tightened. It rose from the center of the clearing like a rusted skeleton, the metal girders streaked with brown and orange. The upper cabin leaned slightly to one side, and the railing around it was bent, as if something had once slammed into it. The forest surrounded it on all sides, dark and thick. The kind of place that made you feel watched, even when you knew you were alone. The lower door hung crooked on its hinges. I pushed it open, and the sound echoed up through the hollow structure. Inside, dust covered everything, yet the air didn't feel stale. My flashlight beam passed over a small table, a cracked mug, and a stove filled with gray ashes. I reached down and touched one. It was still faintly warm. Someone had been here. My pulse quickened, but I tried to stay rational. Maybe some hikers had taken shelter recently. Maybe the rangers hadn't logged it. Still, the idea of anyone wandering this deep into the woods felt unlikely. I dropped my bag and got to work. The signal box sat in the corner under a broken window. The panel was intact, but the cables were frayed. When I turned the dials, the static buzzed to life, sharp, alive. I adjusted the frequency until a faint rhythmic clicking filled the room, like someone tapping on a microphone. I shut it off. On the desk beside it lay a notebook. The cover was swollen with moisture. The pages crinkled and yellowed. I flipped through until one line caught my eye, written in shaky pencil. "Keep the door closed after dark. You won't hear them if you do." I read it again, then laughed softly under my breath. Probably a joke left by some bored ranger years ago. Still, I closed the door. Dusk came quickly. By the time I checked my watch, the sky had already drained of color. I radioed base, but the signal barely reached. They told me to stay the night. Fog was too thick to drive back safely. I didn't like the idea, but I had no choice. I set up my sleeping bag in the corner near the cold stove. The wind moaned through the gaps in the window frames, and the metal walls creaked like an old ship. Somewhere below, a loose piece of railing clanged in the wind. At first, I thought I could sleep, but around midnight, a noise woke me. A soft, metallic ping, like a footstep on one of the lower stairs. I held my breath, listening. Another sound followed, slow, deliberate. Someone was climbing. I reached for my flashlight. Its beam sliced down the stairwell through the metal grates, revealing nothing but fog. "Hello?" I called. My voice echoed hollowly. No answer. I waited for a full minute before hearing it again. Not from below this time, but somewhere above, near the outer walkway. Something moved outside. I crept toward the window. The fog was so thick I could barely see the trees below. Then, for a moment, I saw movement. A dark shape passing between the beams of the tower. Too large to be an animal. My breath caught in my throat. I turned back, grabbed the small hatchet from my pack, and waited. Every few seconds, I heard faint scraping against the outer wall, like fingernails on metal. I tried to distract myself, checking the signal box again. The static had returned, louder now, pulsing. I turned the dial. A deep, distorted hum filled the cabin, followed by what almost sounded like breathing. I yanked the plug free. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. Minutes dragged into hours. I must have drifted in and out of half-sleep because when I next opened my eyes, the light from my flashlight had died. The only illumination came from a thin sliver of moonlight slipping through the cracked window. I sat up slowly, trying not to make noise. That's when I realized the door to the stairwell was open again. I was sure I had closed it. I moved toward it, my fingers tight around the handle of the hatchet. The hinges creaked softly as I pushed it wider. Below, the metal steps disappeared into shadow. The air smelled faintly of rot. Then I heard it. A breath. Long, deep, wet. It wasn't mine. The sound came from the base of the tower, from the dark beneath the stairs. I held my light downward, shaking it until it flickered back to life. And for half a second I saw it. A figure. It was tall, hunched, covered in mud or something worse. Its head hung low, arms too long, the fingers scraping the steps. It wasn't moving toward me. It was waiting, listening. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. The entire structure groaned as if something had slammed against the supports. Dust rained from the ceiling. I grabbed my pack, my flashlight, anything I could carry, and bolted for the exit. Outside, the fog swallowed everything. The trees stood like dark pillars, endless in every direction. I didn't care which way I ran. I just needed to move. My boots splashed through puddles, snagged on roots, tore through undergrowth. The air stank of damp moss and iron. Behind me, the tower creaked again, metal groaning, echoing through the woods. And then, footsteps. They weren't far. I forced myself faster, lungs burning, every breath sharp as glass. I reached the edge of the clearing and looked back. Through the fog, I saw the tower's outline fading, but at the very top, a light flickered on. Someone was inside. The beam of the light swept slowly across the clearing like a searchlight. It stopped, pointed directly at me. I froze. My chest heaved, my hands shook, and for a moment I thought maybe it was just a reflection. Maybe I had triggered something. But then the light tilted slightly, and the faint outline of a head appeared behind it. I ran, branches whipped across my face, my breath ragged. I didn't look back again. Only when the forest began to thin and the dirt road reappeared did I slow down. My truck sat right where I'd left it, half buried in fog. I fumbled for the keys, threw my gear inside, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the mist, but something stood in the middle of the road ahead. At first, I thought it was a tree. Then it moved. Slowly, the shape straightened. Mud dripped from its hands. Its face, if it had one, was hidden behind a tangle of wet hair and dirt. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt them, watching. I slammed the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning in the mud. The figure didn't move until the last second, slipping sideways into the dark. I drove without stopping, without thinking, until the fog finally broke and the morning light started to creep through the windshield. When I finally stopped at the ranger station, my hands were still trembling. They asked what I'd seen. I told them the truth, about the tower, the noises, the figure. They exchanged glances, quiet. One of them finally said, "That tower's been sealed for years. The last ranger who stayed there, he never came back." I didn't answer. Later, when I looked back through the truck's windshield, I could still see the forest in the distance. Just above the tree line, faint and flickering, was a single light, glowing from the top of the tower. And this time, it didn't go out. Dylan was the one who came up with the weekend getaway idea. A couple of nights away from the city, somewhere quiet, isolated, where no one would find us. He had found a small lake on a map, something called Blackwater Lake, tucked deep in the woods north of Washington, just outside the national park boundaries. A place so forgotten that even the road leading there didn't have a name. There were 3 of us, me, Dylan, and Ryan. Nothing unusual about that. 3 grown men looking to escape the noise, fish a little, clear our heads. We left early in the morning. The air was misty, the road lined with trees that grew closer and closer until they nearly touched above us. The city faded behind, replaced by an endless wall of green. The asphalt turned into dirt, and the ride got rougher, the car bouncing over roots and stones. Ryan drove, Dylan followed the map, and I stared out the window. By the time the sun began to fade, we reached the entrance of an unmarked trail. The lake lay somewhere inside, unreachable by car. We grabbed our packs and started walking. The only sound was the crack of branches underfoot. Even the birds were silent. The trees were thick, the sky almost invisible. The air smelled of pine, wet soil, and something faintly metallic. After half an hour, the forest suddenly opened, and there it was, the lake. The surface was so dark it looked black, smooth as a mirror, unmoving. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, watchful. Dylan smiled. "Exactly what I imagined," he said. We chose a spot a few meters from the water and set up camp. We pitched the tents, built a fire, set up the fishing rods. As dusk settled, the lake turned a dull silver. Ryan cracked open a beer, I cast a line, and Dylan sat on the rocks near the water. A thin mist began to rise from the center of the lake. At first it felt perfect, calm, quiet, peaceful. We laughed, talked, let the forest swallow our words. But when darkness fully came, the forest changed. Beyond the flicker of our firelight, everything became deep, cold, and alien. Around midnight, the lake stirred. A ripple appeared in the middle, perfectly round, then faded. Dylan leaned forward, squinting. "Probably a fish," Ryan said. But fish didn't move like that, not so wide, not so silent. There was no sound, no splash, just that single motion. A shiver crawled up my neck, but I stayed quiet. We went back to the fire. An hour later, Dylan stood up. "I'm going to check the water with my flashlight," he said. Ryan shrugged. Dylan walked to the edge, his light sweeping across the dark surface in a narrow golden beam. "Something's out there," he said after a moment, then laughed nervously. "Never mind. Must have been nothing." He came back, but his smile looked forced. Later, everyone went to their tents. I couldn't sleep. The faint sound of water filled my ears. No wind, no frogs, just water moving, slow and deliberate. I was half asleep when I thought I heard something snap, like a branch breaking in the distance. Or maybe I dreamt it. When I opened my eyes the next morning, sunlight barely reached through the trees. Dylan's tent was open and empty. His stuff was still there, but his boots were gone. Ryan called his name. No answer. "Maybe he got up early to fish," I said. But his rod was still here. We walked to the water. The surface was calm, undisturbed. Only a few broken branches near the shore and a faint, partial footprint in the mud. A quiet dread settled in. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't explain why. Dylan wasn't the type to wander off alone. Ryan grabbed his flashlight. "Let's check around the lake," he said. We started walking. The silence in those woods was unbearable. Even our footsteps felt too loud, too real. We circled for half an hour before we found something. On the far side of the lake, in a patch of soft mud, there was a trail. Not footprints, but something dragged, something heavy. Ryan crouched and touched the ground. "Fresh," he said. "Last night." My pulse spiked. Suddenly the whole forest felt different. A branch moved somewhere far off, then everything stilled again. I had the overwhelming feeling that someone was watching us, but the woods were empty. We moved on, and a few minutes later, we stumbled upon an old campsite. A half-collapsed fire ring, rusted cans, a soaked blanket. "Someone's been here," Ryan muttered. "But when?" The cans were rusted, but not old, maybe days. It was clear now. Dylan didn't just vanish. Something had happened. We headed back to our camp. Phones, no signal. "We should go back to the car," I said. Ryan shook his head. "Not without Dylan. Maybe he'll come back." That's when we heard it. A metallic sound, scraping, slow and uneven, like steel on rock. It came from across the lake. We ran toward the sound, crashing through the brush. But by the time we reached the shore, there was nothing. The water was still, silent, and yet faint ripples spread from the center again. Ryan's voice was shaking. "Someone's here," he whispered. That night, we didn't light a fire. We didn't go into the tents. We sat back to back, flashlights on, listening. The wind had started now, whispering through the trees. Every crack, every rustle made us flinch. Neither of us slept. By the time dawn bled through the canopy, we were hollow-eyed. I looked toward the lake. Something floated near the center, small, dark. I stared without blinking. It wasn't moving with the wind. I lifted my flashlight. The beam skimmed across the water. Ryan came up beside me. "What is that?" he asked. The shape drifted slowly toward shore. We ran to the edge. It was a jacket. Dylan's jacket. I knew it by the small metal loop on the zipper. We used a stick to pull it closer. It was heavy, tangled in weeds. When we finally dragged it to shore, my blood froze. Underneath the jacket, Dylan's arm surfaced. I didn't scream. My body just stopped. Ryan fell to his knees, whispering, No, no, no. Dylan lay half submerged, face up toward the sky. His skin had gone pale gray, his chest bruised as if something had pressed down on him. His eyes were closed, his mouth half open, frozen in a silent gasp. We sat beside him for hours, too stunned to move. Phones, still no signal. The lake was calm again, but the calm felt different now. Not peaceful, but patient. Watching. We finally decided to leave. While packing, Ryan froze mid-step. "There's something there," he said. About 50 meters away, behind the trees, stood a makeshift structure, a shelter built from branches, metal scraps, and tarps. It was barely standing. As we approached, a foul stench hit us. Rot, damp, and decay. Inside was a filthy mattress, plastic bags, empty bottles, and a rusted knife. One of the bottles had a fresh fingerprint on it. "Someone's been here," Ryan whispered. Then a sound, a sharp crack from deep in the woods. We turned at the same time. No one there. But something, a shadow, moved between the trees. We ran, left the tents, the gear, everything. All that mattered was getting out. Branches whipped our faces as we bolted down the path. Behind us, footsteps, heavy, steady. The car came into view, half hidden in fog. We dove inside. Ryan started the engine. As the wheels spun, a figure appeared at the edge of the forest. Tall, still, watching. The headlights hit it, and it was gone. Just branches, just wind. We drove in silence for miles. When we finally left the forest, our phones came back to life. We called the police and told them everything. By the time the search team reached the lake at sunrise, Dylan's body was gone. No jacket, no footprints, nothing, except for one thing. In the mud, right at the water's edge, was a single fresh footprint, larger than ours, deeper, and it led straight into the lake. The night isn't over. If you dare to stay in the dark, leave a like. Subscribe to meet again in the next story, and tell me what you think in the comments.